I was working the front desk at a boutique hotel in Prague when an American in his 50s walked up, passport in hand, looking irritated. He'd just arrived from the airport. Before I could greet him, he tapped the counter twice and said, "I need you to know I don't tip in countries where service is already included." "That's double charging," I blinked. We hadn't discussed tips. He hadn't even checked in yet. But that moment, that immediate assumption that I was trying to scam him, set the tone for his entire stay. Every interaction became a negotiation. Every simple request turned into a lecture about how things work back home. By day 3, the housekeeping staff drew straws to see who had to clean his room. The thing about losing respect abroad isn't always dramatic. It's rarely one big moment. It's the steady accumulation of small interactions, where someone assumes everyone else is wrong, uninformed, or trying to take advantage. And I've seen it happen in ways that still surprise me, like the woman at a pharmacy in Stockholm who insisted the pharmacist was lying about needing a prescription for antibiotics. "In America, I can get these at Walgreens," she said, voice rising. The pharmacist, calm as ever, explained Swedish medical regulations. The woman pulled out her phone and started filming, saying she'd report this to corporate. The pharmacist worked for the government, or the guy in a Tokyo convenience store who got frustrated that the clerk didn't speak English. "You're in a major city," he said, loud enough for other customers to hear. "This is basic customer service." He didn't consider that Japan has 3 writing systems, and English isn't one of them. The clerk apologized anyway, bowing repeatedly, while the American muttered about efficiency. Then there was the family in a cafe in Buenos Aires who demanded ice water, then sent it back because the ice cubes were too small. When the waiter explained those were standard-sized cubes, the father said, "In Texas, we know how to make proper ice." The waiter nodded politely and brought a fresh glass. Same ice. The father didn't notice. These moments stick with you because they're so avoidable. They happen when someone treats unfamiliarity as incompetence, when different becomes wrong, when asking a question feels like admitting defeat. I've worked in hospitality across 3 countries now. I've met Americans who were curious, humble, genuinely interested in understanding new places, but I've also watched respect evaporate in real time, usually before anyone realizes it's happening. But that was just the beginning. Was working as a waiter in a small restaurant in Lyon when I learned that service culture is where respect often dies first. An American couple in their 30s sat down on a Wednesday evening, studying the menu like it was a contract. The moment I approached, the woman said, "We'll need separate checks. In France, splitting bills isn't standard. Most restaurants can do it, but it requires manual calculation since the payment systems aren't built for it." I explained this politely, offering to write down what each person ordered so they could divide it themselves. The husband's face hardened. "That's ridiculous. Every restaurant in Dallas has this figured out. Are you saying French technology is behind Texas?" I wasn't saying anything about technology. I was explaining a cultural norm, but to him, different meant inferior. He spent the next 10 minutes explaining how American POS systems work, as if I'd never considered the concept of splitting a bill. When I finally processed their payment, manually calculating each item, he left no tip and made a point of saying, "Maybe invest in better systems." The kitchen staff asked what happened. I told them. The chef, who'd trained in New York for 2 years, just shook his head. "They think efficiency equals respect," he said. "But they don't see us as efficient. They see us as stubborn." I've spent years working across 12 countries, collecting these patterns most people never see. If you want this kind of cross-cultural clarity regularly, the stuff that keeps you from becoming the story someone else tells, subscribe. I break down these invisible rules every week. A few weeks later, I saw a similar pattern at a hotel in Copenhagen where I'd picked up weekend shifts. An American businessman checked in late on a Friday, exhausted from travel. At 11 p.m., he called down asking for room service. I explained that the kitchen had closed at 10, but I could recommend several nearby restaurants still open. "What kind of hotel doesn't have 24-hour room service?" he asked, genuinely baffled. "I'm staying at a 4-star property." I explained that in Denmark, service staff have regulated hours. Late night. Room service wasn't common outside major international chains. Most guests grabbed something before returning to the hotel or ordered delivery. "So you're telling me that worker rights matter more than customer satisfaction?" he said. It wasn't really a question. I wanted to say yes, actually. Worker rights do matter, but I just repeated the restaurant recommendations. He hung up without responding. The next morning, he mentioned the interaction in his checkout review, calling it unprofessional, that the hotel prioritized staff comfort over guest needs. The thing is, he wasn't entirely wrong to be surprised. Different service models exist worldwide, but the way he framed it as a moral failing rather than a cultural difference, that's where respect evaporated. The morning receptionist who read his review didn't feel criticized. She felt disrespected, like her entire country's labor culture was being judged as inadequate. I saw this again in Lisbon, working at a cafe near the Alfama district. A young American woman, maybe 25, ordered a coffee and sat down at a table. She'd been there about 15 minutes when she waved me over. Annoyed. "I'm still waiting for my check," she said. I was confused. She hadn't asked for it. In Portugal, the check comes when you request it. People sit at cafes for hours. We don't rush anyone out. "That's so inefficient," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "How do you turn tables over? How do you make money?" I explained that the business model wasn't based on rapid turnover. Our margins were different. Our customers expected to linger. She pulled out her phone and started typing a review right there. "1 star for service speed," she announced, as if I'd be devastated. "In Seattle, we'd have you trained better." An older Portuguese man at the next table, someone who came in every morning, looked over. He didn't say anything to her. But he caught my eye and smiled, this small gesture of solidarity. Later, he left me a larger tip than usual and said in Portuguese, "Some people think the whole world is waiting on them." That phrase stuck with me because that's what it looks like from the outside. Not curiosity about why things work differently, just impatience that the world hasn't adapted to one specific model. I transferred to work at a hostel in Krakow the following summer. The owner was Polish, the staff international, the guests from everywhere. One afternoon, an American student staying in a dorm room came to the desk, frustrated. "I asked someone to clean my room 3 hours ago and nothing's happened." I checked the system. He hadn't asked anyone. He'd mentioned to another guest, an Australian guy, that the room was messy. The Australian, not being staff, hadn't passed along any message. "You have to actually tell the front desk," I explained. "We don't monitor conversations between guests." "That's insane," he said. "Any good hostel would be proactive about cleanliness. You shouldn't wait to be asked." I looked at him for a moment, trying to understand the logic. We cleaned common areas on schedule. We cleaned dorm rooms when requested or during checkout. What he wanted was constant monitoring, anticipation of needs before they were expressed. "That would require us to enter your room without permission throughout the day," I said. He paused, realizing the privacy issue. "Well, yeah, but only to check." We didn't clean his room that day. Not out of spite, but because by the time we processed the actual request, housekeeping had finished their shift. The next morning, he checked out early and left a review complaining about Eastern European service standards. Lagging behind Western expectations, the owner printed the review and hung it in the staff room with a smiley face drawn on it. We all knew what it really meant. His expectations weren't universal truths. I was working as a tour guide in Edinburgh when I realized that confident Geographic ignorance might be the fastest way to lose respect. A family from California, parents and 2 teenage kids, joined my walking tour of the old town. About 10 minutes in, the father interrupted to ask, "So, when do we get to the England part?" I stopped walking. "This is Scotland," I said, thinking maybe he'd misspoken. "Right. Scotland. England. Same thing, basically," he said, waving his hand. "It's all the UK." One of the other tourists, a woman from Glasgow, made a sound somewhere between a cough and a laugh. I took a breath and explained that Scotland and England are distinct countries within the UK, with separate legal systems, education systems, and cultural identities. The father looked annoyed, like I was being pedantic. "But you all share a government, right? So it's basically like states." "Not quite," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's more like how Canada and the US are both in North America, but aren't the same country." He didn't look convinced, but he stopped arguing. His teenage son, however, pulled out his phone and started fact-checking me mid-tour. Every historical point I made, he'd search for confirmation, occasionally announcing, "He's actually right about that one." The kid meant well, probably. But it created this atmosphere where my expertise was constantly under audit. By the end of the tour, the other guests were noticeably annoyed. The woman from Glasgow tipped me extra and whispered, "Sorry about that," gesturing toward the American family. A few months later, I was working at a museum in Reykjavik when I saw something similar. An American couple in their 60s was studying a map of the North Atlantic. The husband pointed at Iceland and said, confidently, to his wife, "This is why Iceland's population is so small. Look how close it is to the Arctic Circle. Barely any sunlight most of the year." I was standing nearby, repositioning a display. Iceland's population is small for lots of reasons, but its location provides 24-hour daylight in summer and only a few hours of darkness in winter. Not endless night, I gently offered. Actually, Reykjavik gets quite a bit of daylight variation. Summer's nearly constant sun. The man looked at me like I'd challenged him to a duel. "I've studied Nordic geography," he said. "The Arctic Circle affects daylight significantly." "Iceland's just south of it," I said, still trying to be helpful. "Only the northern coast crosses the line." He pulled out a phone, searched something, then pocketed it without comment. He didn't acknowledge being wrong. Just moved to the next exhibit. His wife gave me an apologetic smile. The thing about these moments is they're not malicious. They're confident, and confidence without curiosity becomes arrogance, which locals pick up on immediately. I saw this again in Singapore, where I was working at a university's International Student Services office. An American exchange student came in, frustrated about his housing assignment. "I specifically requested to be near downtown," he said, "but they put me way out in Jurong." I pulled up a map. Jurong is in the western part of Singapore, but Singapore is 281 square miles total. Nothing is that far from anything else. Jurong to downtown is about a 30-minute train ride, I explained. Singapore's public transit is very efficient. 30 minutes is way out, he insisted. That's like living in the suburbs. I wanted urban living. I paused, trying to understand his scale reference. "Where are you from?" "Houston." That explained it. Houston sprawls over 670 square miles. His sense of distance was calibrated to a completely different urban model. But instead of adjusting his expectations, he kept insisting that Singapore's layout was misleading. "The brochure said centrally located housing options," he continued. "This isn't central." I showed him that all student housing was within a 5-mile radius of campus, which in Singapore terms is extremely central. He wasn't interested in the comparison. He wanted validation that he'd been deceived. He eventually filed a formal complaint. It went nowhere, obviously, but the staff talked about it for weeks. Not because he was wrong about his preferences, but because he couldn't conceive that central might mean different things in different contexts. Later that year, I was working at the information desk at Kruger National Park in South Africa. An American family arrived for a safari tour, and the father asked, "How long until we see lions?" "It depends," I said. "This is a wild park, not a zoo. Animal sightings aren't guaranteed." "But we paid for a tour," he said. "The website showed lions." I explained that the website showed what animals live in the park, not what you definitely see on any given day. Alife, viewing requires patience and luck. "That's false advertising," he said. He genuinely believed the park was somehow hiding lions or not trying hard enough to present them. His daughter, maybe 13, seemed embarrassed. "Dad, it's nature. They're not on a schedule." "We have schedules in Yellowstone," he countered, which wasn't true. Yellowstone doesn't schedule wildlife either. The guide who took them out later told me the father spent the entire drive complaining that they weren't seeing enough headline animals. They saw zebras, giraffes, elephants, and countless birds. But no lions meant the tour was a failure in his mind. When they returned, he demanded a partial refund. He didn't get one, but he left a review saying the park was overrated compared to American national parks, and that African wildlife tourism has better marketing than actual experiences. The review got reported for misinformation, but the damage to respect was already done. The staff, all local South Africans deeply knowledgeable about conservation, saw that review as a dismissal of their expertise, their ecosystem, their entire approach to wildlife management. I was working at a pharmacy in Amsterdam when I learned that everyday systems are where respect gets lost in the smallest, most accumulating ways. A woman in her 40s approached the counter, holding a package of paracetamol, confused. "Why is this behind the counter?" she asked. "It's just Tylenol." I explained that in the Netherlands, even common pain relievers are pharmacy only to prevent misuse and ensure proper dosing advice. "That's so paternalistic," she said, not quietly. "Adults should be able to buy medicine without permission." I noted that she could buy it, just from a pharmacy rather than a grocery store. The regulation was about access points, not restrictions. "In California, I can get this at a gas station," she continued. "This is why Europe feels so controlled." A Dutch customer waiting behind her caught my eye and smiled. After the American left, the Dutch woman said, "She thinks freedom means buying painkillers at a gas station. We think freedom means not having medicine marketed like candy." Neither view was wrong exactly, but one person was curious about the difference, and the other was offended by it. A few weeks later, I was working at a post office in Prague during a summer internship. An American student came in needing to mail a package home. He'd already wrapped it himself, covered in tape. "I need to see the contents before you seal it," I said. "I already sealed it," he replied, annoyed. "Just weigh it and give me the price." I explained that Czech postal regulations require visual confirmation of contents for international shipments. "Security protocol. That's an invasion of privacy," he said, voice rising. "You can't just demand to search my property." I wasn't demanding anything. I was explaining the mailing process. If he didn't want to show contents, he couldn't use the postal service. He stormed out, muttering about communist-era policies still hanging around. The irony, of course, was that the U.S. has similar requirements for international mail. He just didn't recognize the process outside his familiar context. I saw this again in Melbourne, where I worked at a bank's international services desk. An American expat came in, frustrated about setting up an account. "Why do you need so much documentation?" he asked. "I have my passport. That should be enough." I listed the required documents. proof of address, tax identification number, visa status verification, standard anti-money laundering compliance. "This is bureaucracy gone crazy," he said. "In America, I walked into a bank with my driver's license and opened an account in 20 minutes. I wanted to point out that American banks also require multiple documents, especially for foreign nationals, but I sensed it wouldn't help." He wasn't comparing equivalent situations. He was comparing his easiest experience at home with his hardest experience abroad. Eventually, he gathered all the documents. The account opened fine, but he left a review online saying Australian banking was decades behind American efficiency, which wasn't true. It was just different regulatory priorities. Later, I was working the reception at a gym in Mexico City. An American member, a digital nomad type in his late 20s, complained that the gym closed at 10 p.m. on weekdays. "That's so early," he said. "My gym in Austin was 24 hours. I explained that Mexico City has noise ordinances and that most gyms close by 10 or 11 to respect residential neighbors." "Noise ordinances at a gym?" he said, laughing. "That's ridiculous. It's a business." "It's a business in a neighborhood," I replied. "People live upstairs and next door." He kept pushing, suggesting we just ignore the ordinances or pay the fine if it happens. The idea that community standards might be worth following didn't register. He saw regulations as obstacles to his convenience, not as frameworks for collective living. He eventually switched to a 24-hour chain gym farther from his apartment. Problem solved for him, but the staff remembered him as the guy who thought rules were suggestions. I moved to work at a salon in Oslo for a few months, covering for a friend. An American woman came in for a haircut. "No appointment. I need a trim," she said. "Probably 20 minutes?" I checked the schedule. "We're fully booked today. I can schedule you for tomorrow afternoon." "I just need a trim," she repeated, as if that changed availability. "You've got scissors. I've got hair. This doesn't require an appointment." I explained that Norwegian salons work by appointment. Walk-ins aren't standard, especially in smaller shops. "That's so inefficient," she said. "What if your 2 p.m. cancels? You're just leaving money on the table." "If someone cancels, we call the wait list," I said. "But I'm here now," she pressed. "I'm literally available money standing in front of you." The owner, overhearing this, came out. She calmly explained in perfect English that the salon's model prioritized scheduled clients, fair wages, and predictable hours for staff. Walk-in culture creates chaos and undervalues workers' time. The American woman left, visibly annoyed. Later, she posted that the salon was stuck in old-fashioned business models and didn't understand modern customer service. The owner printed that review too. She said it perfectly captured the divide. The customer thought modern meant accommodating her individual needs instantly. The owner thought modern meant sustainable business practices that respected workers. These weren't dramatic confrontations. No one yelled. No one got refused service. But respect drained away in these micro moments, because one side treated their way as the default and everything else as a failure to meet standards. The Norwegian salon owner said something I've never forgotten. "They don't see us as different. They see us as wrong. And that's why they lose respect before they even realize it's happening." That single insight, different versus wrong, is the kind of framework shift most travel content never reaches. I don't do surface-level tips. I decode the psychology underneath the mistakes. The people who subscribe aren't looking for travel hacks. They're looking for cultural fluency. If that's you, you already know what to do. I was working at a small art gallery in Marrakech when I witnessed the most memorable example of respect lost and, surprisingly, regained. An American couple in their 50s came in, browsing traditional Moroccan paintings. The husband, confident and loud, asked the price of a particular piece. The artist, who owned the gallery, quoted the price in dirhams. The American immediately said, "I'll give you half that. I know how haggling works here." The artist's expression didn't change. "This is a gallery, not a souk. The price is fixed," the American laughed. "Come on, everything's negotiable in Morocco. That's the culture." The artist, still calm, said, "Would you walk into a New York gallery and offer half the listed price?" The American paused. "That's different. That's professional art. And this isn't?" the artist asked, gesturing to his own work, pieces that had been exhibited internationally. The wife touched her husband's arm. Something shifted in the room. The husband, to his credit, looked genuinely uncomfortable. I apologize," he said. "I made an assumption." The artist nodded. "Many people do. They see Morocco and think certain rules apply everywhere, but context matters." The couple ended up buying the painting at full price. Before they left, the husband asked if they could take a photo with the artist, not for social media, just for themselves. To remember, the artist agreed. After they left, I asked him why he gave them grace after such a disrespectful opening. "He was ignorant," the artist said, "but not arrogant. When he understood, he adjusted. That's rare. Most people double down. That difference between ignorance and arrogance might be the key. Everyone's ignorant when they arrive somewhere new. That's expected. But arrogance is the refusal to learn, the insistence that your confusion is everyone else's problem. I've worked across 12 countries now, in roles that put me face to face with travelers daily. I've seen respect evaporate in seconds, and, occasionally, rebuild itself just as fast. The pattern is always the same. Respect dies when someone treats difference as deficiency. It survives when curiosity outlasts confusion. The Americans who do well abroad, the ones locals remember fondly, aren't perfect. They make mistakes. They misunderstand things, but they ask questions. They adjust. They recognize that being lost doesn't mean everyone else is wrong. These stories never stop coming, and neither does my analysis of them. Every week, I publish this level of cultural decoding, the patterns, the psychology, the exact moments where respect is won or lost. Most people stumble through these situations blind. Subscribers see them coming. That's the difference. Every week, someone new arrives, assuming the world works one particular way. Sometimes they learn, sometimes they don't. But either way, respect is decided in those first few moments, in those small interactions, when someone decides whether different means wrong or just different. The art gallery in Marrakech closed last year. The artist moved to Casablanca for a bigger space, but I still have a photo of that painting the American couple bought, the one that started as an insult and ended as a lesson. Sometimes that's how respect works. Not inevitable, but possible.